I hope you're enjoying this quilt project as much as I am. And this week we're going to be working on our quilt backing or lining. Some people call it a backing, some people call it a lining. So the back of the quilt, anyway, is what we're going to be working on. And I'm going to show you 4 or 5 different ways of doing that lining so you can take your pick. I'll also tell you the method that I'm going to be using. We have our finished quilt top, and we need to make sure that it's the size that we anticipated that it would be, the size that's on our little worksheet here. So this one says that it is supposed to be 84 by 100. So I'm going to measure just to be sure my measurements are accurate. So I need to measure the width and the length. So 36 plus 6 is 42. And 42 times 2 is 84. Okay, so it's the correct width. Now I'm going to measure the length. So 36 plus 14 is 50 times 2 is 100, so it's right. So it's 84 by 100. So I'm going to put my quilt top aside and decide what I'm going to do about a lining. Well, for our lining, we need to add 4 inches on each side, because when you're quilting a quilt, it shifts a little bit, so that you need extra fabric around on each side to accommodate that shifting of the fabric as you're quilting it. I have been known to have to add a little bit of fabric to the backing to accommodate that shifting when I didn't add enough around the edges. Okay, so that means I need a lining that is 92 by 108. Okay, so here are the options, as I see it anyway. There may be other ways to do a lining, and I'm sure there are, but these are the ways that I'm familiar with. Now, the easiest way is to get fabric that is 108 inches wide, as is this. And if you can see this very closely, it is beautiful fabric. And it is 108 inches wide. And I think I got 3 yards. So that means that this piece of fabric is 108 by 108. So I could use this and simply lay it out and put my quilt top, my batting of course, and then the quilt top on it. And I don't have to do anything else to this piece of fabric for my lining until after I get finished quilting. So using quilting fabric that's 108 inches wide is one option. Now, I hate to bother the little fella. He's so comfy. But I really don't want gray fur on my pretty white fabric. So I'm going to put that up. Now another option that's very easy and I've done a lot of times is to use a flat sheet. Well, this is not new, but it's actually never been used. It's been washed and folded and put in my linen closet, but I've never actually used it. And this is a queen quilt. But I've measured this, and it's going to be a couple inches short, top and bottom. I probably could use it if I rip out the hem, but when you rip out the hem of a sheet, it doesn't always lay right, and sometimes you can see where that row of stitching for the hem for the sheet was. So I'm not going to use this flat sheet at this point for this quilt, but with a smaller quilt it would be very easy to use a flat sheet. Now, if I had a king size, then it would probably work perfectly. And then all I have to do is spread it out, put my batting and my quilt top on it, and quilt it. So that's the second option, use a flat sheet. And I've done that several times, and it makes a great lining, especially if you get a good sheet like this one, with at least a, I don't know, 200 or 300 thread count, at least, I would say. All right, so option number 3. Okay, so I have this beautiful white flannel that I'm going to use for my lining, and it is 60 inches wide. So because my quilt is 84 inches, when I add 4 inches to each side, which is a total of 8, so 84 plus 8 is 92. So I need 92 inches of fabric in the width, and it's 100. The quilt is 100 inches long. So when I add my 8 inches, it's going to be 108. So that means that I need 3 yards of this fabric for the length, but then I need 2 lengths because I need 92 inches. So I need 2 times 3, which is 6 yards. So I bought 7 yards just to be sure I would have enough. So I need to cut off a yard of fabric from the length. And let me go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to leave it doubled, and I'm going to double it again. I don't have that large a space to work on. Now I'm going to pin where I want to make my cut off a yard. And then I'm going to measure the rest to be sure there hasn't been some mistake somewhere. make sure I have my full 6 yards. I don't want to have to go back and piece the fabric. Okay, yeah, that's plenty. I'm not short. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off my 1 yard. I'm just going to put a light pencil mark. Okay, so I have my 6 yards. I'm going to put up this extra yard. Now I'm going to open the fabric up. Now remember, on fabric, the outside is the top side. So I need to turn my top side up and open up this 6 yards, and I've got the right sides together, and I'm going to put the two of the selvage edges together. So all I have to do is sew these 2 of my selvage edges together. So I'm going to sew down the entire length, sewing the 2 pieces together. Now when I sew this together, I'm not going to stick with the 1/4 inch seam rule. I'm going to make it a 1/2 inch. Maybe a little bit more than 1/2 inch. I'm going to make sure that I'm following the edge, the inner edge of the selvage, so that the selvage doesn't show on the quilt backing. So let's look at what we have. Okay, so all we have to do is cut this one end apart, and our lining is ready to go. Now you can use a ruler and your rotary cutter, but I'd rather just cut it apart like this with the scissors. Our lining will be finished as soon as I press the seam down. Press it to one side. Alright. There is another way, couple other ways of making the lining. And because I have such a small space to work in, I'm going to show you using some small pieces of fabric, just as an example of what I'm talking about. So this method of making a quilt backing is a little bit different to this prior method where we just sewed the fabric, the two pieces of fabric, cut them the same width and sewed down one side, cut the bottom, and then we had our quilt top when we opened it up, pressed our seam down. But this one is going to be a little bit different. If you don't want that one seam down the middle, then we're going to sew down two sides, and we're going to start at the top. Don't start sewing one here and then the opposite corner start here. Start at the top on both of them. So I've put a seam down both sides of the fabric, and those would be, if this were an actual piece of fabric we were going to use, there would be selvages on both sides. Also, if you sewed down the selvages on both sides, sewed two pieces of fabric together, you would have a seam in the middle. So because we don't have a seam in the middle, I'm going to open up the pieces of fabric. We've got the shape of a cylinder here. So I'm going to pin these together. Now, like I said, if you're using two large pieces of fabric, you won't have to do this pinning because you'll have a seam to go by. So what we're going to do is cut one of these pieces in half. And again, you can do this with a ruler and your rotary cutter, but I'm just using the scissors. Anyway, take our pins out, and instead of having one seam down the middle for your backing, it's going to look like this. You'll have the wide piece in the middle, and then the narrow pieces on each side. So this is what your backing would look like. And the last method of making a backing that I wanted to show you is when you made your quilt top, if you had some large pieces of the fabric that you made your 9-patch stars out of, can pretend these are bigger pieces of fabric, like 12-inch squares instead of the smaller ones. But you could do your quilt backing like this. Use fabrics from your quilt top. You can do squares, you could do strips, you could do, well, anything you wanted to do. pretend these are strips. Well, I do have some strips. You could make a pattern of any kind you wanted. It doesn't have to be a solid backing is my point. You can really do for your backing whatever you want to do. So I've given you several options here. You can do patchwork on the back. You can do large strip in the middle with the smaller strips on each side, like this one. You can do the, like I've done on mine, where you sew the fabric. You'll have the two equal size pieces on each side and have your seam down the middle, the way I'm doing mine. Or you can use the flat sheet, if that would work for you, the size of the sheet. Or you can use the wide quilting fabric that's 108 inches wide, that's going to be a solid piece of fabric for your backing. So you have options. So if you have questions, please leave me notes in the comments and I'll answer them right away. And next week we'll be putting our quilt sandwich together. What I'm going to do, since my house is so small and I don't have room really to spread a quilt out to get it ready for quilting, I'm going to take mine to where I work, which I work in a school library, and I'm going to put 4 tables together. So if you have a community center or church that you have access to, anything that's got large tables, you can do the same. Otherwise, you may have room at home. So we'll work on our quilt sandwich next time. Have a good week.